The anniversary wine was still breathing on the table when the notification chirped. A 60-second audio file from my husband that didn't start with "I love you," but with the name of a woman I didn't know. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. I am Mr. ZAHA. Thanks for tuning in today. A kind words from a man who has seen it all. Marriage are not mostly bed of roses. Sometime you need more of. More of what? Can't say. Continue watching, and you will surely know what to do in situations like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So let's get started. The emerald silk dress felt like a second skin that no longer fit. Amanda reached out to steady herself, her palm pressing against the cold, unyielding granite of the kitchen island. The silence of the penthouse, which she had once cultivated as a mark of sophistication, now felt predatory. Every tick of the designer clock on the wall was a hammer blow against her heart. She stared at the phone. It looked so innocent, a slim rectangle of glass and titanium, yet it held the explosive power of a landslide. 60 seconds. That was all it took to erase 10 years. She thought of the dinner. She had spent the afternoon in the kitchen, a rarity these days since they had a private chef, but she wanted today to be different. She had braised the short ribs in a reduction of the same vintage red they had shared on their first date in that cramped, drafty apartment in Brooklyn. She had found the exact brand of candles they had used back then, cheap, vanilla-scented things that smelled like hope and struggle. She had been trying to find a way back to him, to them. The deepest betrayals often happen in the places we feel safest. Have you ever felt a sudden, cold intuition that your life was about to change forever, just moments before the truth came out? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm here to listen to your stories. Amanda played the memo a fourth time. She needed to be sure. She needed to hear the inflection in his voice, the way he breathed the name Sarah. It was the intimacy of it that killed her. It wasn't just the betrayal of a physical act. It was the betrayal of the spirit. Jordan was a man who prided himself on his control, his stoicism, and his impenetrable corporate armor. To hear him sound so vulnerable, so desperate for someone else, was like watching a stranger inhabit her husband's body. She walked toward the dining table. The wine, a $2,000 bottle of Bordeaux, sat in the decanter, breathing. It was supposed to be a celebration of survival, of a decade spent navigating the treacherous waters of the elite. Instead, it looked like a pool of blood in the candlelight. She remembered the Jordan of 10 years ago. He had been lean, hungry, and full of a fire that had nothing to do with money. He used to come home to their studio apartment with grease on his hands from the subway and collapse onto their thrift store sofa, pulling her into his lap. "One day, Mandy," he would whisper, his eyes bright with ambition. "One day, I'll give you the world." He had kept his promise. He had given her the world, but in the process, he had lost himself. And now, she realized, he had lost her too. In the back of the Maybach, Jordan Vance leaned his head against the cool leather headrest. His reflection in the tinted window looked like a man who had everything, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone drowning in a sea of his own making. He didn't know he had sent the memo to Amanda. He had been distracted, his mind a chaotic mess of quarterly projections and the overwhelming, suffocating pressure of a board of directors that wanted his head on a silver platter. Sarah was his assistant, or she had started that way. She was 24, bright-eyed, and looked at him not as a billionaire, but as a man who needed saving. But as the car pulled into the private underground garage of the penthouse, a cold knot of dread began to form in Jordan's stomach. He looked at his phone. He saw the sent receipt. His heart stopped. The recipient wasn't Sarah. It was Amanda. "Sir? We're here," the driver said, his voice a low murmur. Jordan didn't move. He stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his pupils. He felt a wave of nausea. He loved Amanda. In his own fractured, distorted way, she was the only real thing in a life that had become a performance. Sarah was a fantasy, an escape from the crushing weight of being Jordan Vance. Amanda was his history. She was the one who knew the boy who used to skip lunch to buy her a single rose. He had just destroyed the only person who actually loved the boy, not the billionaire. Amanda heard the private elevator chime. It was a soft, melodic sound that usually signaled the end of her loneliness. Tonight, it sounded like a warning bell. She stood at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't turn off the candles. She didn't hide the phone. She stood in the emerald dress, a statue of grief, watching the doors slide open. Jordan stepped out. He looked impeccable. His charcoal suit was custom-tailored, his hair perfectly styled, his presence commanding. But the moment his eyes met hers, the mask slipped. He looked at the table, the candles, the wine, and then at the phone in her hand. "Amanda," he whispered. His voice was cracked, the command gone. "The short ribs are cold, Jordan," she said. Her voice was remarkably steady, though her heart was a wild bird trapped in a cage. "But I think the wine has finally finished breathing. Would you like a glass? Or are you too busy counting the minutes until you can get back to her?" Jordan took a step forward, his hands reaching out instinctively, then dropping to his sides. "Mandy, I can explain. It's not what it sounds like. Not what it sounds like." Amanda gave a short, jagged laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "It sounds like a man who is trapped in a life I spent 10 years helping him build. It sounds like a man who calls me she to another woman. It sounds like a man who has forgotten who he is. I was under pressure. The board is pushing for a buyout. I was." "Stop," Amanda said, and the power in her voice made him flinch. "Don't you dare blame this on the board. Don't you dare blame this on your billions. You sent a voice memo to your lover on our 10th anniversary, Jordan. You didn't even have the decency to remember which woman you were talking to." She picked up the wine decanter. For a second, Jordan thought she was going to throw it at him. Instead, she poured a glass, her hand trembling so slightly only someone who knew her as well as he did would notice. "You said she's the only place you can breathe," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What am I, Jordan? Am I the oxygen mask you use when you're underwater? Or am I just the anchor that's pulling you down?" Jordan walked to the edge of the table. He looked at the candles, the cheap, vanilla-scented ones. He recognized them. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the night they bought those in Brooklyn. They had no electricity because he'd forgotten to pay the bill, and they had sat on the floor, eating pizza and laughing until their sides ached. "I'm a coward, Amanda," Jordan said, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at her as a CEO or a husband, but as a man who had failed himself. "I reached for her because she didn't know the boy from Brooklyn. She only knew the man who won. I didn't want to show you how scared I am of losing it all. I didn't want you to see the cracks. The cracks were what I loved most about you, you idiot," Amanda shouted, the tears finally breaking through. "I didn't marry the billionaire. I married the boy who shared his pizza with me. I would have stayed with you if we lost every cent, but I can't stay with a man who hides in the arms of an assistant because he's too proud to be honest with his wife." She walked past him, the silk of her dress brushing against his suit. She didn't look back. She went into the master suite and shut the door. Jordan stood alone in the candlelight. The smell of the vanilla candles was suffocating now. He looked at the phone on the counter. He looked at the gilded silence of his life. He had reached the top of the mountain, only to realize he had pushed the only person who mattered off the cliff. The anniversary dinner sat untouched. The wine continued to breathe in the silence. Amanda sat on the edge of the bed, the emerald dress a pool of dark green on the white duvet. She didn't cry anymore. She just listened to the silence of the penthouse. It was no longer the silence of wealth. It was the silence of a ruin. Visual note: the emotional distance between them in this act is like a vast, cold gallery. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't stay in this museum of their failures. She needed to go somewhere where the air was real. She stood up, stripped off the emerald silk, and pulled on an old pair of jeans and a faded sweater, the clothes of the woman she used to be. She grabbed her keys and a small bag. As she walked out of the suite, Jordan was still standing by the table, his head bowed. "I'm going to the apartment in Brooklyn, Jordan," she said. "The one we kept for sentimental reasons. Don't follow me. Don't call me. And for God's sake, don't send me any more voice memos." She walked into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing her in a small, metallic box. As she descended 50 stories toward the ground, she felt the weight of the penthouse lifting, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. The betrayal was the spark, but the fire was just beginning. The drive to Brooklyn was a blur of neon lights and rainy asphalt. Amanda sat in the back of a generic rideshare, her face pressed against the glass, watching the skyline of Manhattan, the skyline her husband practically owned, recede into a shimmering, distant memory. She had left her phone in the penthouse. She didn't want to see his name flash on the screen. She didn't want to see a news alert about his company. She wanted to disappear into the skin of the woman she was before the private jets and the silent auctions. The apartment on Hoyt Street was a fourth-floor walk-up. Jordan had tried to sell it years ago, calling it a depreciating asset, but Amanda had fought him for it. It was the only place where the walls didn't feel like they were judging her. As she turned the key in the lock, the air hit her, stale, smelling of old wood and the faint, lingering scent of the lavender sachets she had hidden in the drawers years ago. It was freezing. She didn't turn on the overhead lights. She moved by the pale glow of the street lamp filtering through the grime-streaked windows. She sat on the floor in the middle of the empty living room. Her knees touched the worn hardwood where they had once danced to a radio that only picked up one station. The silence here was different. In the penthouse, the silence was sterile. Here, it was heavy with the ghosts of who they used to be. "Sarah," she whispered. The name felt like a physical object in her mouth, something sharp and metallic. She began to wonder. When had it started? Was it during the merger in Tokyo, when Jordan had been gone for 3 weeks? Or was it the late nights at the office when he told her he was recalculating the risk of a new acquisition? She realized with a sickening jolt that she had been curated out of his life long ago. She was the legacy asset, valued for her history and her appearance at his side, but no longer part of the daily operations of his heart. Back in the penthouse, Jordan was a man possessed by a quiet, vibrating rage, not at Amanda, but at the vacuum of his own life. He had spent the last 3 hours sitting in the dark, the short ribs congealing on the plates, the candles burned down to puddles of wax. He picked up the wine glass Amanda had poured. He took a sip, but it tasted like vinegar. He looked at his phone. He had drafted a dozen texts to her, but he deleted them all. What could he say? "I'm sorry I found a younger version of our excitement because I was too proud to show you my fear." His phone buzzed. It wasn't Amanda. It was Sarah. "Sarah, Jordan, are you okay? You didn't answer my last 3 texts. I'm at the gallery opening. I thought you were coming." Jordan stared at the screen. He felt a wave of profound, visceral disgust. Not for Sarah. She was just a symptom, but for the man he had become. He looked at the emerald silk dress Amanda had left draped over the sofa. It looked like a discarded skin. He typed back, "It's over, Sarah. Don't call me again. My resignation from the board and my restructuring of the firm will be on your desk by morning. You were a distraction from the only thing that mattered, and I let myself be distracted." He blocked the number. But Jordan knew a text wouldn't fix a decade of emotional erosion. He knew that Amanda wasn't just at the Brooklyn apartment. She was at the end of her rope. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the elevator. He didn't call his driver. He needed to drive himself. He needed to feel the resistance of the road. In Brooklyn, Amanda had found an old box in the closet. Inside were letters, handwritten notes Jordan had sent her when he was traveling for his first mid-level management job. "Mandy, the hotel is fancy, but the bed is too big without you. I'm sitting here looking at the blueprint of this new project, but all I see is the blueprint of our future. I'm doing this for us. Just wait for me." She clutched the paper until it wrinkled. "I'm doing this for us." That was the lie that killed most marriages in their circle. It started as "for us," and it ended as "for me." Is a secret lover always about lust, or is it often about a person trying to escape the person they've become? Have you ever had to choose between the life you built and the person you used to be? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about the complexity of these choices. A heavy thud echoed from the hallway. A knock at the door. Not the polite, rhythmic knock of a neighbor, but a desperate, heavy pounding. "Amanda, I know you're in there." Jordan's voice was muffled by the thick oak door, but the urgency was unmistakable. Amanda didn't move. She stayed on the floor, the letters scattered around her like fallen leaves. "Go away, Jordan. Go back to your tower." "I'm not leaving, Mandy. I'll sit in this hallway all night. I'll buy the whole damn building if I have to, just so I can stand on the other side of this door." "That's your answer for everything, isn't it?" she shouted back, her voice cracking. "Buy it. Own it. Restructure it. You can't restructure a heart, Jordan. You can't acquisition a decade of trust back into existence." "I ended it," Jordan yelled, his forehead pressed against the wood. "I blocked her. I'm leaving the board. I don't care about the firm, Amanda. I care about the fact that I haven't breathed properly since we moved out of this zip code." Amanda stood up, her legs stiff. She walked to the door, but didn't open it. You sent that memo to her on our anniversary. You were in the car, coming to me, and your first thought was her. You didn't just break a rule, Jordan. You revealed a truth. You don't want me. You want the woman who doesn't know you're a failure. I am a failure. Jordan's voice broke. That's what I couldn't tell you. The firm, we're being audited. I made a call, a bad one, 3 years ago. I've been chasing the tail of a disaster ever since, trying to keep the billionaire Jordan image alive so you wouldn't have to worry. Sarah, she was just someone who didn't look at me with expectations. I was a coward. I used her to hide from you. Amanda leaned her head against the door, mirroring his position on the other side. The wood was the only thing between them, yet it felt like a mountain range. You think I stayed for the money? She whispered. I stayed because I thought we were a team. I would have stood by you in a courtroom, Jordan. I would have stood by you in a prison cell. But I won't stand by a man who thinks I'm so shallow that I only love his bank account. Then let me in, he pleaded. Let me show you the cracks. Please. Amanda's hand hovered over the deadbolt. Her heart screamed for the comfort of his arms, but her mind replayed the voice memo, the growl in his voice when he said Sarah's name. She turned the lock. The door swung open. Jordan looked wrecked. His tie was gone, his shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were red. He looked more like the Brooklyn Jordan than he had in years. He took one look at her, standing in her old jeans, surrounded by the ghosts of their past, and he collapsed. Not physically, but emotionally. He fell to his knees in the doorway, his head dropping into his hands. I lost us, he sobbed. I worked so hard to give you everything that I ended up giving you nothing. Amanda looked down at him. This was the man who had just accidentally shattered her world. This was the man who had betrayed her. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a lost boy who had tried to buy his way out of his own shadow. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his hair. For a moment, there was a spark of the old connection, a silent, visceral understanding. But then, Jordan's phone, which he had dropped on the floor, lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text. It was a news alert from a major financial outlet. Breaking, federal authorities move on Vance Holdings. CEO Jordan Vance under investigation for multi-million-dollar securities fraud. Warrants issued. Jordan looked at the screen, then up at Amanda. The silence in the room became deafening. Jordan, Amanda whispered, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. What did you do? Downstairs, the faint wail of sirens began to cut through the Brooklyn night, growing louder, closer, heading straight for Hoyt Street. The sirens aren't just a metaphor for their marriage. They are a literal threat. As the law closes in on Jordan's secrets, Amanda is faced with a choice. Run from the man who betrayed her, or stay and fight for a husband who might be heading for a cage. Visual note. The visual contrast of the luxury phone screen flashing the ruin of his empire against the backdrop of their humble, dark first apartment. The truth is finally out, but it's heavier than Amanda ever imagined. Would you stay with a partner who betrayed your heart if you found out they were also about to lose everything else? Tell me what you would do in the comments below. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers began to dance against the peeling wallpaper of the Hoyt Street apartment, rhythmic and accusing. The wail of the sirens died down into a low, predatory hum as they idled at the curb 4 stories below. Inside, the room was frozen. Amanda stood over Jordan, her hand still hovering near his hair, but the warmth had evaporated. Jordan stared at the phone. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes, making him look like a man watching his own execution. The breaking news alert was a death warrant for the life they had spent a decade building. The audit, Amanda whispered, her voice barely a breath. You said it was a bad call, Jordan. You didn't say it was a crime. Jordan stood up slowly, his joints popping in the silence. The weight of the world, the real world, the one with bars and gavels, seemed to settle onto his shoulders, bowing them. It was a leverage play, Mandy. 3 years ago, when the market dipped, I moved funds. I thought I could bridge the gap before the reporting cycle. I thought I was being the genius everyone expected me to be. But the gap never closed. I spent the last 1,000 days trying to bury the bodies, and Sarah, she was the only one who didn't ask questions because I paid her not to. The realization hit Amanda like a physical blow to the stomach. The voice memo wasn't just an affair of the heart. It was a symptom of a systemic rot. Sarah wasn't just a lover. She was a co-conspirator or, at the very least, a witness he had tried to keep satisfied. You didn't just betray me with another woman. Amanda said, her voice rising as the shock turned into a searing, white-hot fury. You betrayed everything we were. You turned our life into a shell game. Every charity gala, every house, every piece of jewelry I'm wearing, it was all bought with stolen time. I did it for you, Jordan shouted, his voice cracking as he stepped toward her. I couldn't let you go back to this. I couldn't be the man who failed. Look around you, Jordan. Amanda gestured wildly at the empty, freezing apartment. I was happy here. I didn't need the penthouse. I needed you. And now, I don't even know who you are. The man I married wouldn't have lied to me for 3 years while he slept with his assistant to hide his tracks. A heavy, authoritative knock echoed from the hallway. Not Jordan's desperate pounding, but the rhythmic, official strike of someone who wasn't leaving. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Jordan Vance, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door. Jordan looked at the door, then at Amanda. For a split second, the billionaire was gone, and the terrified boy from Brooklyn was back. He looked at her with a plea so raw, it was almost unbearable. He was a man drowning, reaching for the only anchor he had ever known. Mandy, he whispered. Please. Amanda looked at the door, then at the box of old letters on the floor. She thought of the voice memo, the Sarah of it all. She thought of the 3 years of lies. Every instinct in her body told her to let them take him, to walk out the fire escape and let the man she no longer recognized face the consequences of his own arrogance. But then, her eyes landed on a specific letter at the top of the pile. It was a note he'd written on their 5th anniversary, when they were still living in a 2-bedroom in Queens. If the world ever tries to tear us down, Mandy, remember that we are the only 2 people who know where the foundation is buried. She closed her eyes. The sirens outside were a siren song of escape. She could leave. She could testify. She could be the victim the world expected her to be. Instead, she moved. The back window, she hissed, grabbing his arm. The fire escape leads to the alley behind the bakery. They haven't blocked the rear yet. Amanda, what are you doing? Jordan asked, stunned. I'm not doing this for you, she said, her voice hard as flint. I'm doing this because I'm not finished with you yet. You don't get to go to a cell and hide from me. You owe me the truth, Jordan. Every single word of it. She shoved him toward the window. They scrambled out onto the rusted metal grating, the freezing rain slicking the iron. As they descended, Amanda could hear the front door of the apartment being breached, the sound of wood splintering, a metaphor for her life. They reached the alley, their breath coming in ragged plumes. Jordan's expensive Italian shoes slipped on the wet cobblestones, but Amanda held him up. She led him 3 blocks over to a parking garage where she kept an old, nondescript SUV, a vehicle Jordan had told her to sell years ago, but she'd kept just in case. She got behind the wheel, her hands white-knuckled on the steering power. Jordan sat in the passenger seat, staring at the floorboards. As they pulled out into the Brooklyn night, the radio flickered to life. Every station was talking about him. The fall of Jordan Vance. The billionaire fraud. Reflection and CTA 3. Amanda is now an accomplice to a fugitive husband who broke her heart. Is her decision to help him a sign of weakness? Or is it the ultimate act of a woman who refuses to let her history be dictated by anyone else? What would you do if the person who hurt you most suddenly needed you to survive? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you draw the line. They drove in silence for an hour, heading north, away from the city and toward the small, secluded cabin in the Catskills they had bought under a shell company years ago. It was a place Jordan hadn't visited in half a decade. To him, it was a low-value asset. To Amanda, it was a fortress. As the sun began to peek through the dark clouds, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, they pulled into the dirt driveway. The cabin was covered in a thick layer of dust, the air inside smelling of pine and stagnant time. Amanda sat at the small wooden kitchen table. She didn't turn on the lights. She waited for the engine of the car to tick down into silence. Sit, she commanded. Jordan sat. He looked smaller in the dim light of the cabin, stripped of his custom suits and his boardrooms. Now, Amanda said, placing her hands flat on the table. I want the whole story. I want to know about Sarah. I want to know about the money. I want to know exactly when my husband died, and this stranger took his place. Jordan looked at her. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind whistling through the mountain pines. He began to talk. He talked for 3 hours. He told her about the first bad trade, a desperate attempt to prove he was as big as the legends he admired. He told her how Sarah had caught him altering the ledgers and how he had used her loneliness to buy her silence, which eventually turned into a hollow, transactional romance that made him hate himself every time he touched her. He told her about the voice memo. It hadn't been a mistake of the thumb, but a mistake of the mind. He had been so exhausted, so fragmented by the double life, that he had reached for the only person who knew his sins because he couldn't face the woman who knew his soul. I sent it to you because I think, subconsciously, I wanted to be caught, Jordan whispered, his head bowed. I couldn't keep the weight of the lie anymore. I wanted you to hate me, so I didn't have to keep pretending to be a hero. Amanda listened. She didn't cry. She felt a strange, cold clarity. She saw the man before her not as a monster, but as a masterpiece that had been cracked and glued back together so many times that the glue was all that remained. You think you're a hero or a villain, Jordan, she said. But you're just a man who forgot that a foundation built on a lie eventually sinks. You ruined us to save an image of us. I'll go back, Jordan said. I'll turn myself in. I'll tell them it was all me. I'll make sure you're protected. You can't protect me anymore, Jordan, Amanda said. You lost that right when you sent that memo. She stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, she could see the dust of a car approaching on the long, winding mountain road. Her heart skipped. Was it the feds? Or was it someone else? She turned to Jordan, her eyes hard. Someone is coming. Jordan stood up, his face pale. I didn't tell anyone about this place. Neither did I, Amanda said. The car, a black sedan, pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out. She was young, her blonde hair windblown, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. It was Sarah, the secret lover, has found their secret sanctuary. As Sarah stands in the driveway, Amanda is forced to face the living embodiment of Jordan's betrayal. Does Sarah come to help, to hide, or to burn the rest of their lives to the ground? Visual note. The visual of the three characters caught in a triangular tension in the remote, silent woods, the ultimate forced proximity. The mistress has arrived at the hideout. This just shifted from a legal drama to a psychological battle. Who do you think Sarah is really working for? Jordan, herself, or the people trying to take him down? Give me your theories in the comments. The screen door of the cabin creaked, a sharp, metallic groan that felt like a scream in the stillness of the Catskills. Amanda stepped onto the porch, her boots thudding against the weathered wood. Behind her, Jordan stood in the shadows of the doorway, his face a mask of paralyzed terror. In the driveway, Sarah stood by the idling sedan. She didn't look like a mistress. She looked like a woman who had been through a car wreck. Her expensive trench coat was wrinkled, and as she pulled off her sunglasses, her eyes were rimmed with a frantic, red exhaustion. How did you find this place? Amanda's voice was like ice, cutting through the mountain air. Sarah didn't look at Amanda. Her eyes went straight to the shadow of Jordan. The shell company, Jordan. You gave me the password to the asset management folder 6 months ago when you were too drunk to hide the ledger. I saw the deed. I knew you'd come here. It's the only place you own that isn't under surveillance. Why are you here, Sarah? Jordan stepped onto the porch, his voice low and jagged. I told you it was over. I blocked you. You blocked me, but you didn't stop the subpoenas. Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. The feds were at my apartment an hour after you left the penthouse. They know about the transfers, Jordan. They know I was the one who signed off on the offshore accounts. They offered me a deal, immunity if I give them the location of the encrypted drive you took. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the clearing. The encrypted drive. Amanda turned her head slowly to look at her husband. You didn't just take a bag of clothes, did you? Amanda whispered. Jordan didn't look at her. He looked at Sarah. I have to have leverage, Sarah. Without that drive, I'm just a man in a cell. With it, I can negotiate. Negotiate what? Sarah laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. They don't want to negotiate with you. They want to make an example of you. And I'm not going to jail for your genius play. Give me the drive, Jordan. I have a car waiting 2 miles from here to take me to a private airfield. If I give it to them, I disappear. If I don't, we both go down. Amanda watched the exchange, her mind working with a clinical, detached speed. She looked at the woman who had been in her husband's bed, the woman who had heard his secrets, and then at the man she had spent 10 years trying to protect. She realized then that she wasn't just in a love triangle. She was in a life and death struggle for the remains of her own dignity. The drive is in the car, Sarah, Jordan said, his voice trembling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB. Jordan, don't, Amanda said, stepping between them. Mandy, get out of the way, Jordan pleaded. If she takes it, the heat moves to her. She can give them the names of the board members who were in on it. It's the only way I stay out of a cage. Is it? Amanda asked, turning to face him. Is that the man you want to be? The one who hides behind women? You hid behind me for the money, and you're hiding behind her for the crime. When does it stop, Jordan? When do you finally stand on your own 2 feet? This isn't about pride anymore, Amanda. This is about survival. No, Amanda said, her voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the entire forest. This is about the foundation. If you give her that drive, you aren't just a fraud. You're a ghost. You'll never be able to look me in the eye again. You'll never be able to go back to Brooklyn. You'll just be a man who bought his freedom with someone else's life. She turned to Sarah. You want the drive? You think it's your ticket out? Look at him. Look at what he's become. Is this who you want to save? Or do you want to save yourself? I'm saving myself, Sarah screamed, stepping toward the porch. Give it to me, Jordan. Reflection and CTA 4. The moment of truth has arrived. Jordan has the power to save himself by sacrificing his remaining soul, or to face the consequences and keep his humanity. What would you do in Amanda's shoes? Would you let the mistress take the fall, or would you force your husband to face the music? Tell me in the comments. This is the ultimate test of character. Jordan looked at the silver drive in his hand. He looked at Sarah's desperate, greedy face. Then he looked at Amanda. In that moment, the 60-second voice memo replayed in his mind. He remembered the feeling of being trapped. He realized that the trap wasn't the house or the money. The trap was the cowardice. He had spent 3 years running from the truth, and it had led him to a dirt driveway in the middle of nowhere, flanked by the 2 women he had betrayed. He closed his fist over the drive. No, Jordan said. Jordan, give it to me. Sarah lunged for him, but Jordan stepped back, his face hardening into a resolve that hadn't been there for a decade. I'm not giving you the drive, Sarah, Jordan said. And I'm not running. I'm calling the U.S. attorney. I'm going to tell them everything, about the board, about the trades, about all of it. And I'm going to tell them you were an employee I coerced. I'll take the full weight. Sarah froze. The anger in her face evaporated, replaced by a profound, hollow shock. You do that? You'd go to prison for 20 years. I've been in a prison for 3 years, Sarah, Jordan said, his eyes finally finding Amanda's. I'd rather be in a cell where I can breathe than in a palace where I have to lie to the woman I love. Sarah looked at them both, the wife in her old jeans and the billionaire who had just thrown away his last card. She realized she had lost. She got back into her car, the gravel spraying as she sped away, leaving them in a cloud of dust and the absolute, terrifying silence of the truth. Jordan turned to Amanda. He held the drive out to her. You take it. Do what you want with it. Call them. Or throw it in the lake. It doesn't matter anymore. Amanda didn't take the drive. She looked at the man before her. He looked broken, yes. He looked ruined. But for the first time in 10 years, he looked like Jordan. I'm not calling them, Amanda said. You are. You're going to walk into that office tomorrow morning, and you're going to tell them the truth. And I'm going to be sitting in the front row of the gallery every single day of the trial. Why? Jordan asked, his voice breaking. After everything, why stay? Because, Amanda said, her voice trembling but certain. We are the only 2 people who know where the foundation is buried. And I'm not letting you bury it alone. She walked toward him, and for the first time since the voice memo had chirped in the penthouse, she pulled him into her arms. It wasn't a hug of passion, it was a hug of shared wreckage. They stood in the freezing mountain air, 2 people who had lost the world but found the truth. Suddenly, the sound of a helicopter began to thump in the distance, growing louder, the searchlights beginning to sweep across the pine trees. The law has arrived. The forced proximity of the cabin is about to be broken by the cold reality of handcuffs and headlines. As the searchlights find them on the porch, Jordan whispers one last thing to Amanda, a secret that Sarah didn't know and that the feds haven't found yet. The blinding white light of the helicopter spotlight illuminating the couple on the porch, casting them in high-contrast black and white. Jordan chose the truth over a getaway. Do you think this is the beginning of his redemption, or is it just too late? Can a marriage really survive a federal trial and a mistress? Drop your final theories in the comments. The spotlight from the helicopter above was a physical weight, a pillar of white fire that turned the dust on the cabin porch into a swirl of silver ghosts. Jordan shielded Amanda's eyes with his hand, a protective gesture that felt archaic and raw given the circumstances. The thrum of the rotors vibrated in their chests, the sound of a world that had finally caught up to them. "Amanda," Jordan whispered, his mouth close to her ear to be heard over the roar. "In the old apartment, behind the radiator in the kitchen, there's a ledger I kept. Not the digital one, the real one. It shows the board's signatures on the 2022 buybacks. If things go wrong, use it. Protect yourself." Before she could respond, the clearing was flooded with men in tactical gear. The transition was clinical, swift, and devoid of the drama Amanda had imagined. There were no shouts, just the crisp, professional commands of agents who had been tracking a high-value target for months. Jordan didn't resist. He held his hands out, his eyes locked on Amanda's until the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut. In that moment, the billionaire Jordan Vance truly died. As they led him toward the black SUVs that had snaked up the driveway behind the helicopter's lead, he turned back one last time. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes was a silent plea for her to keep breathing. Amanda stood on the porch until the tail lights faded into the trees. She was alone in the silence of the Catskills, the mountain air finally still. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She walked back inside the cabin, sat at the wooden table, and watched the sun fully crest the mountain. She had 24 hours before the media storm reached her. She had 24 hours to decide if she was a wife or a survivor. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a hive of controlled chaos. The trial of United States versus Jordan Vance had become a national obsession, a modern-day Greek tragedy of wealth, infidelity, and corporate greed. Amanda sat in the front row of the gallery every single day. She wore simple, dark suits, no jewelry, no designer labels. She had sold the penthouse, the cars, and the art collection to pay for Jordan's defense and to settle the initial civil claims against the firm. The media called her the stoic wife, speculating on her motives. They didn't understand that she wasn't there for the man the world saw. She was there for the boy who had once shared a pizza with her in the dark. Jordan looked different in the defendant's chair. He had lost weight. His hair was grayer, his skin sallow from months in pretrial detention. But he was present. He didn't hide behind a team of lawyers. He took the stand and he spoke the truth about the trades, about the board, and about the voice memo that had started the collapse. Sarah had testified for the prosecution. She had been sharp, bitter, and focused on her own immunity. When she spoke of their affair, she looked at the ceiling, refusing to meet Amanda's eyes. But when Jordan spoke of Sarah, he didn't call her a lover. He called her a symptom of his own cowardice. He took full responsibility for his actions, shielding her from the criminal charges of the offshore accounts by admitting he had manipulated her. It was an act of grace that the court hadn't expected. On the final day of the trial, before the jury retired to deliberate, Jordan was allowed a brief, supervised visit with Amanda in a small, sterile room behind the courtroom. "The board took the plea deal," Jordan said, his voice a rasp. "The ledger you found, it changed everything. They're going down for the 2022 buybacks. My sentence won't be as long because of the cooperation." "How long, Jordan?" Amanda asked. 10 years, he said, looking at his hands. "With good behavior, maybe 7. Amanda looked at him. 7 years. A lifetime in the world they used to inhabit. But in the real world, it was just time. "I signed the papers for the Brooklyn apartment," Amanda said. "I bought it back with the remains of my personal inheritance. It's the only thing left. I'm moving in next week." Jordan looked up, a flicker of hope. Real hope, not the gilded kind, lighting his eyes. "You're staying in the city?" "I'm staying where the foundation is," she said. Jordan reached across the table, his fingers grazing hers. "I don't deserve you, Mandy. I know that. The memo, the things I said. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to erase those 60 seconds. "You can't erase them," Amanda said, her voice firm. "They happened, but we can build over them. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Jordan. It's about deciding that the future is more important than the past." The guard knocked on the door. Time was up. 3 years later. The visiting room at the minimum security facility in upstate New York was filled with the low hum of families. It was a humble place, far removed from the glass towers of Manhattan. Amanda sat at a small plastic table, a cup of lukewarm vending machine coffee in front of her. She looked at the clock. 1 p.m. The door opened, and Jordan walked in. He was wearing a plain green jumpsuit. He looked healthy. He'd been working in the prison gardens, his hands once again stained with the earth instead of the ink of fraudulent ledgers. When he saw her, his entire face transformed. It was a smile that didn't have to be curated for a board of directors. "I finished the book you sent," Jordan said, sitting across from her. "The one about the history of the Brooklyn Bridge. It made me think about the way things are built to withstand the wind." "We're doing okay, Jordan," Amanda said. She told him about her work. She had started a nonprofit that helped the families of white-collar criminals navigate the fallout of their lives being dismantled. She told him about the Hoyt Street apartment, how she'd fixed the radiator and repainted the kitchen. "I have something for you," Jordan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I can't send voice memos in here, so I had to go back to basics." Amanda unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note. "Mandy, I am 3 years into the truth. Every night I sleep in this cell, I feel more free than I ever did in the penthouse. I am learning to breathe again, but only because I know you're out there, holding the line. Wait for me. We're almost home." Amanda felt a tear escape, rolling down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't ashamed of her emotions. "I'll be there, Jordan," she said. "The short ribs might be a little overcooked by the time you get out, but the wine will be ready." They laughed, a soft, genuine sound that drew looks from the other tables. It wasn't the laughter of billionaires. It was the laughter of two people who had been through the fire and found each other in the ashes. For years later, the heavy iron gates of the facility swung open. A man stepped out, carrying a single duffel bag. He wasn't met by a Maybach or a driver. He was met by a woman in an old SUV. Jordan walked toward Amanda. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man. He reached the car, and without a word, he pulled her into a hug that lasted for an eternity. The scent of the mountains was around them. The air was clear, and the silence was finally, truly, peaceful. "Where to?" Amanda asked, her hand on the gear shift. Jordan looked toward the horizon, toward the distant, shimmering skyline of New York. But then he looked at the woman beside him. "Brooklyn," he said. "Let's go back to the beginning." As they drove away, the radio played a soft, acoustic song. There were no news alerts. There were no secret lovers. There was only the road, the truth, and a love that had been rebuilt, brick by agonizing brick, until it was strong enough to touch the sky. The voice memo was a ghost of the past. Their future was being written in the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts that had finally learned how to beat as one. Redemption isn't a gift, it's a choice made every single day. Amanda and Jordan lost everything the world said mattered, but they found the only thing that actually does. Do you believe that a marriage can truly be stronger after a betrayal like this? Have you ever had to rebuild something from the ashes? Share your final thoughts in the comments. This is where the Betrayal story begins. The sun set over Hoyt Street as they pulled into their spot. They walked up the 4 flights of stairs together. When they reached the door, Jordan stopped. He took the key from Amanda's hand. "I'll open it this time," he said. He turned the lock, and they stepped into the warmth of their home. The foundation was solid. The air was real. And for the first time in their lives, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.